This tower is all multi-million-dollar units, poor people can look, but that's all. The saleswoman offered a faint smile as her eyes flicked over Julia Bennett's canvas tote and worn-out flats. A faint titter rippled behind her in the lobby, a half-dozen impeccably dressed men and women picking up on the mockery. One or two eyed Julia's simple linen dress, noticing the way its pale fabric wrinkled easily the absence of any designer label. At a polished reception desk, a second sales representative, tall poised hair pulled into a sleek twist, caught the exchange and smirked as well. Julia, undeterred, stood there calmly pressing her lips together into a semblance of polite interest. A man in a fitted navy suit leaned against a marble column swirling a flute of champagne that had been handed to him moments earlier. He eyed Julia over the rim of his glass, then said to his companion, "Is she for real? Doesn't look like she could afford a parking spot around here, let alone a unit." His companion, dressed in a slinky black dress, snorted softly, casting a pitying glance in Julia's direction. When the saleswoman turned back to her, the same strained smile on her face, Julia spoke in a soft voice about wanting to see the penthouse. The saleswoman's eyebrows quirked. She cleared her throat, eyes darting to the fresh cluster of wealthy prospects behind her. "If you don't have a VIP invitation, please wait outside," she repeated this time more pointedly. Another wave of low-voiced mirth swept through those who overheard as if they were witnessing a scene from a petty comedy. Julia nodded, stepping slightly aside, letting a pair of bejeweled women pass by on their way to preview the model suite. Yet she didn't leave quietly lingering as though hoping for a chance to speak further. A second staff member wearing a tidy name tag approached the main desk, noticing the tension. He flicked his gaze from Julia's flats to her tote, then back to her face before turning to the saleswoman. "Should I check her invitation code?" he asked in a conspiratorial whisper, certain that no code existed. The saleswoman shrugged, mocking exasperation. "If she had one, we'd have seen it by now," she replied, not bothering to conceal the exchange from Julia. Behind them, a set of promotional posters displayed glossy images of the tower's terraces, lavish kitchens, panoramic views. Beneath those posters, a group of potential buyers milled about, champagne in hand, each wearing clothing that screamed money. They observed Julia with the mild curiosity usually reserved for an out-of-place child. One of them, a round-faced older man in an emerald suit, mumbled to his wife, "Reminds me of the help back in our beach house, but even they dress better." His wife gave a short, derisive laugh, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. Julia let her eyes wander across the marble floor, the swirl of high heels, polished oxfords, and shimmering attire. She carried herself with a posture that was neither aggressive nor submissive. The hush around her thickened when she politely repeated her inquiry. "May I at least see if the penthouse layout suits my needs?" A tall woman with a cascade of perfectly styled hair, apparently the project's marketing head, heard this from a few steps away. She approached wearing a gracious smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We appreciate your curiosity," she said, "but the top-floor penthouse is shown by VIP invite only. We're focusing on serious buyers today. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable with our other properties." The suggestion fell like a hammer. A man behind Julia coughed, covering a laugh. The saleswoman from before added, "We can offer you a brochure for suburban listings." She slid a single card across the desk printed with a modest home's price tag, as though performing an act of kindness. Julia accepted the card without comment, letting it slip into her tote, the motion smooth, unrushed. The staff's forced smiles did not conceal their impatience. Her continued presence seemed to irritate them, reminiscent of an unwanted guest who refused to understand the rules. A short distance away, a pair of socialites sipped their champagne, occasionally glancing at Julia, whispering behind manicured hands. One had a bold red lipstick, her nails done to match. She tittered, "Who arrives at a launch event in a wrinkled linen dress? Did she just roll out of bed?" Her friend, wearing a pale pink ensemble covered in delicate crystals, smirked. She must think the doorman is going to wave a magic wand and let her buy the penthouse for a bargain. The pair broke into quiet laughter that fizzled when they realized Julia wasn't giving them the outraged reaction they craved. An older couple who had just signed in for a private viewing noticed the stir. The husband, leaning on a cane with a golden handle, frowned and shook his head. The wife, wearing an austere black suit, muttered something about lack of security screening. They turned away, heading toward the elevator that would whisk them to the upper floors for their exclusive tour. The swirling hush around Julia deepened, punctured only by the clink of glassware. Staff and potential buyers seemed to share a collective assumption that she was an intruder from a lower class, a naive visitor crossing the threshold into a realm she couldn't possibly afford. Another staffer arrived with a tray of canapes, offering them to various guests, but pointedly skipped Julia as if she didn't exist in that capacity. Julia stood still, eyes flicking to the canapes only momentarily, then letting the moment slide. Minutes dragged. The lounge area, framed by the building's promotional stands, filled with more high-rolling clients, men in crisp suits exchanging business cards, women in sculpted dresses swirling wine or champagne, all under the watchful eye of staff who buzzed about with forced smiles. Julia's quiet figure near the side remained an unsolved puzzle for them. A flamboyant man in a neon green suit paused to observe her from a distance, angled his head, and said to no one in particular, "Is that part of some marketing ploy?" Like a fake shopper to highlight how out of reach the units are. A short laugh answered him from a staffer, but no direct reply. Julia let their speculation pass, never once giving them the satisfaction of protest or flustered defense. Eventually, another wave of guests formed a line at the main desk for the guided penthouse tour. The sales lead overseeing the queue cast a cold glance in Julia's direction. "Ma'am," she said, raising her voice slightly, "we'll need you to step aside. This group has scheduled appointments." A man sporting a meticulously styled mustache turned to look at Julia, raising an eyebrow in contempt. "Let the real buyers through," he quipped. A smirk spread among his companions. Julia inclined her head calmly, moving just enough to let them pass. She lightly gripped her taut eyes resting on the tall glass doors that led out to the corridor. A staffer, catching sight of her hesitation, repeated under his breath that she was free to wait outside if she wanted more information. The fatherly older man with the cane, returning from a partial tour, recognized her near the desk and gave a snort of annoyance, shuffling away quickly. The tension in the air left a stale taste and undercurrent of cruelty that dripped from each condescending remark. At last, Julia decided to shift from the central lounge to the corridor beyond. She walked with unhurried grace, weaving through the pockets of expensive suits and dresses. Some parted for her, others expected her to sidestep them. She complied without complaint. A hush followed her steps, as if the crowd was relieved that she was in effect removing herself from their domain. The corridor was cooler, less bustling, lined with framed posters detailing the building's opulent amenities. She paused near a large window that overlooked the city from several stories high. The view was partial, but still impressive. Through the glass reflection, she glimpsed her own shape, the linen dress that had prompted so many sneers. Her gaze lifted, scanning the skyline's geometry of steel and lights. For a moment it looked as though she was recalling something distant, a memory glinting in the quiet set of her mouth. Perhaps a time she'd stood in a different high-rise with someone older discussing the nature of property and the illusions of status. When she turned away from the window, a staffer who had come to refill pamphlets briefly locked eyes with her. He hesitated, studying her calm composure, then quickly offered a little nod, half respectful, half nervous. Julia responded with a slight tilt of her head, no animosity. The staffer scurried off, pamphlets clutched tight. Further down the corridor, a quiet hush prevailed. The hum of the lounge's conversation softened, replaced by the faint click of high heels from the occasional passerby. Julia let her tote rest on a bench, slipping it off her shoulder. A potted plant, lush and well-trimmed, stood next to the bench, and she touched one leaf gently as though grounding herself. Her posture stayed upright, not slumping in defeat. She was waiting, but not powerless. Meanwhile, upstairs in the penthouse, the older couple and the flamboyant man in the neon suit exclaimed over the panoramic view. They likely had no clue that the woman they'd mocked was lingering below. Another staffer conferred with the real estate agent about closing deals. The agent, flipping through potential buyers' portfolios, repeated some line about exclusivity. All the while, nobody thought to mention that a quiet figure waited in the corridor, uninvited but unremoved. The building's entire air breathed smugness. In the lounge, the tall man with the impeccably tailored suit was telling a new arrival about some lady who showed up expecting a discount, haha. His friend in the black dress nodded, adding, "She looked like a volunteer from a charity booth or something even less glamorous." Through it all, the sales lead occasionally glanced at the corridor, ensuring Julia was out of their immediate circle. Another wave of guests arrived, each one receiving fawning greetings. Time stretched the corridor's hush unbroken except for Julia's measured breathing. She watched staff hurry about, stepping aside politely whenever they brushed near. A memory flickered across her expression, a tranquil orchard possibly on a family estate where an older caretaker once showed her how easily people could misjudge. The recollection lasted a few seconds, visible only in the faint crease at the corner of her mouth. Then she let it go. She heard a small group shuffle out from the lounge, complaining about the wait for the penthouse elevator. They paused at the corridor's mouth, noticed her, and a younger woman among them gave a small eye roll as though to say, "Still here." Julia remained still, not even acknowledging the dismissive look. The woman and her group scurried off, too preoccupied with their own agenda to dwell on a presumed pauper. Abruptly, a shift in the lounge, the tall glass doors parted, allowing 3 men in matching suits to enter. Each had an earpiece posture, stiff, scanning the environment with practiced wariness. Something about them signaled professional security, not just ordinary staff. The lounge's hum began to recede, replaced by a new tension that made everyone turn their heads. Another staffer, noticing these men, quickly stepped forward with a forced, bright smile, presumably to greet them. The men spoke in low tones, pointing out vantage points around the lounge. A pregnant hush settled, as though everyone sensed the arrival of someone truly significant. Julia, from her vantage in the corridor, recognized the pattern of security forming. She lifted her gaze, exhaling very slowly. The staff near the reception area suddenly straightened. In walked David Harrison, wearing a suit that was distinct for its understated elegance rather than flamboyant detail. The entire lounge seemed to compress around him, staff and guests noticing how the security detail parted for him. Some recognized him from business headlines, a billionaire tech mogul rumored to have major stakes in prime real estate. Indeed, many suspected he was the silent partner behind this tower's development. The older real estate agent in the lounge gaped. The flamboyant man in neon took a half step forward as if to greet David, then thought better of it. The hush thickened, every pair of eyes pinned on him. David scanned the lounge with purposeful calm, as if seeking someone. His expression grew subtly puzzled when he didn't see what he wanted. Then his gaze fell upon the corridor. Ignoring staff who tried to approach him with welcomes, ignoring the flamboyant man's half-raised hand, he crossed the floor toward that hallway. The hush trailed him, a wave of silence in his wake. Julia, hearing the brisk footsteps, turned. Her posture shifted from waiting to acknowledging. One corner of her lips curved in the gentlest of smiles, almost impossible to detect, but David saw it. He crossed the last few paces, the hush behind him deepening as staff and onlookers realized he was greeting that quiet, plain-dressed woman. "Have you been waiting long?" David asked her in a voice pitched so only a few staffers near the corridor could overhear. She tilted her head, a small negative gesture. A staffer at the corridor's mouth took an involuntary step back, glancing wide-eyed between David's expensive suit and Julia's humble attire. The man in the navy suit, still lurking by the lounge, recognized David's face and swallowed color draining from his features. Another wave of realization rippled through the crowd. People who had mocked or laughed at Julia moments earlier now found themselves turning pale, connecting the dots. She was with him, or more precisely, he was with her. David slipped an arm around Julia's waist, the gesture warm and familiar. Then he addressed the cluster of staff who'd begun to gather near the corridor in confusion. "I told them to prepare the penthouse so you could choose in peace," he said to Julia. "Was that not arranged?" She gave the slightest shake of her head, quiet and unaccusing. The staff glances ricocheted off one another, panic evident in their faces. The sales lead, hurrying over, voice trembling, tried to explain that they hadn't realized who she was. David's expression remained calm, though his eyes hardened. "Never judge a client by appearance," he said, voice unwavering. "This is my wife, Julia." That final revelation hung in the air like the closing of a steel vault. Heads turned, jaws slack. The flamboyant man in neon nearly dropped his phone. The older real estate agent clenched his cane so tightly his knuckles whitened. A handful of staff who had mocked her the loudest wore expressions of visible horror. Julia stood near David's side, letting him speak for both of them. She looked at the staff with gentle composure, neither vengeful nor smug. Her silence in that moment acted as a mirror, reflecting their earlier unkind words back to them. A visible wave of self-consciousness swept through the lounge. Some attempted to step forward, presumably to apologize, but David turned away from them, focusing on the sales lead instead. "Escort us to the penthouse," he said. "We'll see if it suits her tastes." The sales lead nodded vigorously, stuttering about how they'd do it immediately. She beckoned them toward the private elevator that was once reserved for VIP tours alone. David guided Julia forward, and the staff parted like a corridor of penitent courtiers. Some of the watchers in the lounge, including the flamboyant man, realized the entire dynamic had flipped in a heartbeat. Where they once felt comfortable mocking her, they now shrank under the weight of shame. In the elevator, David pressed the button for the highest floor. The manager who had rushed in with them began speaking in hurried, apologetic tones about the penthouse's features. Julia listened quietly, her tote still slung over her shoulder, the same scuffed flats on her feet. David's presence radiated a calm power that made further explanation from the manager unnecessary. They reached the top floor, stepping into a corridor lined with tasteful art. Just beyond was the penthouse door leading into an expansive living area walled by floor-to-ceiling windows. The city's evening lights shimmered in the glass, giving the suite a sense of lofty grandeur. The manager rushed to switch on more lights, trying to exude an aura of readiness. David and Julia walked in unhurried steps, taking in the space. The manager pointed out the panoramic terrace, the high-end finishes, and the potential for customization. She spoke breathlessly, aware that a single misstep could spell disaster for her job. Julia paused near a floor-to-ceiling window, gazing at the skyline. The reflection of the suite's interior overlaid the lights of the city, merging them in a mirage of luminous shapes. David asked her quietly if she wanted a certain type of flooring. She responded with a short, almost whispered phrase about preferring simpler materials, something less glossy. The manager nodded, scribbling notes as though the word of a queen had been issued. They toured the private rooms, next a master suite with a balcony that overlooked distant bridges, a study area with potential for a personal library. At every juncture, the manager sought to highlight luxury features, but Julia's reaction remained subdued. She'd run her fingers lightly across a surface or glance at a detail, then pivot her attention forward. The manager sensed that no attempt at impressing her would overshadow the memory of how they'd treated her downstairs. Eventually, the entire walkthrough ended and they returned to the main living area. David turned to Julia, quietly asking if she approved. She gave a small affirmative nod. The manager exhaled in relief, promising to expedite any renovations needed. David thanked her curtly, then said they'd finalize the purchase soon. The manager nearly dropped her clipboard in her eagerness to concur. Julia offered a gentle, perfunctory acknowledgement, then walked with David back to the elevator. Silence weighed on all involved. Downstairs, the lounge remained subdued. Those who had once sneered at Julia braced for them to reappear, uncertain how to handle the moment. David guided her out of the elevator, staff parted again, and they crossed the space. No one dared intercept them. A few tried to muster an apology or a greeting, but the security detail held them off. Julia and David left the tower. Outside, a black sedan idled by the curb. The city's neon signs flickered in the reflection of the car's polished door. David opened the door for Julia with a gentle, familial familiarity. She slipped inside, her expression as composed as when she entered. The driver closed the door behind them, and the sedan joined the stream of traffic, taking them away from the towering edifice. Inside that building, many stood silent, grappling with the abrupt shift from mocking a woman's canvas tote to confronting her as the wife of the city's leading billionaire. Some staff promptly began discussing how to salvage their reputations. Others recognized that no explanation could erase their cruelty. Word spread quickly among the employees, from the flamboyant man in the neon suit to the older real estate agent with the cane. They realized their self-assured judgments might cost them more than social embarrassment. Over the following weeks, a new corporate policy emerged. Every visitor would be greeted with respect, regardless of appearance or perceived net worth. Certain staff rumored to have disrespected Julia most flagrantly found themselves reassigned or quietly dismissed. A hush reigned in the building's lounges, replaced by a watchful courtesy, as though anyone could be the next hidden power. Meanwhile, prospective buyers still came in droves to see the luxurious suites, but employees no longer smirked at simple attire. The story of the fiasco traveled through the city's real estate circles with remarkable speed, cast as a cautionary anecdote about arrogance. People retold the tale. A woman in flats walked in, they laughed, then her billionaire husband arrived and the entire tone flipped. The memory served as a moral lesson urging humility. Some older folks who recalled times they'd been humiliated for dressing modestly found satisfaction in retelling the story, praising Julia's unyielding poise. Julia continued life with her trademark discretion. Occasional glimpses of her at modest shops or strolling in a park wearing the same linen style reaffirmed rumors that she disdained flaunting money. Friends of David quietly noted how his wife radiated a calm that never faltered, an attribute some attributed to a strict upbringing. At times, small details surfaced, a faint monogram on her tote matching an ancient high-end brand known only to insiders, or the way certain older philanthropic families recognized her from private gatherings. Yet she never boasted, never corrected misimpressions. If asked, she simply nodded or offered a benign half-smile. Eventually, the penthouse renovations were done. A hush announcement indicated the owners had moved in. The building staff, now thoroughly trained to greet every occupant with courtesy, found a renewed sense of pride in their improved service. But deep down, many remembered the day they almost lost face entirely. The flamboyant man in neon resigned from the project, stating personal reasons. The older real estate agent with the cane moderated his tone in future dealings, no longer quick to dismiss unassuming visitors. The entire building's culture shifted, guided by the quiet echo of that humiliating day. Some watchers from other real estate firms whispered that the tower had become more inclusive overnight. They half-joked that it took a single linen-dressed woman to force the place to show basic decency. Julia herself rarely hosted large social events. She was glimpsed a few times stepping out of the Penthouse's private elevator with David to attend philanthropic dinners or understated gatherings. On those nights, staff still wore that memory like a brand, offering her unwavering respect. She accepted it politely, never letting them dwell in their guilt. Over time, they relaxed into genuine courtesy, moving beyond forced pleasantries. If by chance a new hire in the lobby commented disparagingly about a plainly dressed newcomer, older staff swiftly corrected them, referencing a story that had for them become mythic. "We once did that," they'd say, and it was the building's darkest day. In the city's social scene, a swirl of rumors tried to pin down Julia's background. Some claimed she came from old money carefully hidden behind an unassuming life. Others speculated she'd grown up ordinary and married into billions. The truth rarely surfaced, and she never volunteered it. But in private circles, a few well-connected individuals remembered a stern patriarch or a quiet mother who once visited a grand estate, glimpsing Julia as a child taught from an early age to find strength in stillness. A stray detail might have emerged, a cameo of her as a teen standing in a large orchard listening to wise words about self-respect. Little puzzle pieces that never fully formed a public picture. She never confirmed or denied any of them. Then one evening, months after their official move-in, a small group of city influencers was invited for an intimate housewarming. They arrived each in carefully chosen outfits, unsure what tone to expect. The Penthouse soared with understated elegance. Some custom elements Julia had requested replaced the typical gleam. Soft wood floors, subtle lighting. The ambiance contrasted with the glitz they had imagined. David greeted them warmly, introducing them to Julia with minimal fuss. A short dinner followed, each course served in a refined but unpretentious style. The guests accustomed to flamboyant parties found themselves disarmed by how calm everything felt. Julia moved among them with quiet efficiency, not ordering staff around, but assisting or offering small conversation. One or two had heard rumors of the fiasco, recognized staff from that day, and realized the difference in the building's vibe. The staff was polite to a fault, yet not in a plastic way. After dinner, one of the guests, a middle-aged woman known for her sharp tongue, approached Julia near the panoramic windows. She commented softly that she'd once seen her in the tower lounge, but at the time didn't realize who she was. Julia listened, a gentle half-smile. The woman fumbled an apology, referencing the cruel remarks she'd overheard from others. Julia's response was a nod and a quiet remark that it was all in the past. The woman's relief was tangible. Observing from a corner, David gave an approving glance, reaffirming that his wife needed no drama to set things right. The rest of the housewarming passed with subdued conversation, the city lights twinkling beyond the glass, and when the guests departed, they carried a renewed sense of humility with them. Eventually, the tower settled into everyday life. Occupants came and went, staff performed their duties, and the memory of that humiliating day drifted to the back of people's minds. Yet in subtle ways, it shaped how they greeted each newcomer. No one wanted a repeat of the fiasco that ended with David's quiet wrath and Julia's silent, unwavering gaze. On the rare occasion Julia walked through the lobby, staff stood a bit straighter, not from fear, but from respect for the lesson she had taught them by simply existing. The same hush that once accompanied her departure now signaled her arrival, but it wasn't an ominous hush, more a gentle hush, as if acknowledging her presence was a reminder that empathy must overshadow superficial judgments. People learned to see beyond frayed shoes or simple dresses, worried that behind those unassuming details might lie a person whose influence dwarfed them all. Those who had once mocked her faced consequences beyond the tower's domain. The flamboyant man in neon found fewer invitations to the city's parties, as some hosts distanced themselves, not wanting to offend the Harrisons. The older real estate agent discovered that deals slipped away from him, as key clients recognized him as the man who'd ridiculed the billionaire's wife. Even the smaller staff who had joined in the scorn discovered their reputations tarnished among colleagues. In the hush of staff break rooms, they spoke of how a single day's cruelty could unravel so much. The building's new manager, installed after a reshuffle, reminded employees daily treat each visitor with compassion. They never knew who might be the next Julia. Julia herself rarely gave interviews or statements, letting the city's rumor mill spin. On a quiet morning, she strolled with David into a philanthropic center wearing the same linen style. A few recognized her from the tower incident, though no one approached. She engaged calmly with the charity staff, discussing expansions, never uttering a word about her property. Observers marveled at the incongruity, a woman wealthy enough to purchase the city's priciest penthouse, yet dressing as if wealth meant nothing. That incongruity was precisely why the lesson had burned so sharply into the tower's memory. She had forced them to see that the veneer of style or brand was a fragile measure of a person. By the 1-year mark of the tower's launch, life within it had normalized. Many expensive units sold, new residents moved in corridors filled with polished decor, and staff upheld their courtesy. Some newcomers who heard fragments of the story about a simple woman turning out to be the tower's biggest power didn't fully believe it. They'd chuckle, saying that's just an urban legend. But the older staff, or those who'd been there that day, would exchange telling glances, recalling how she'd stood among them, absorbing their insults without a blink. The real estate lead, forever changed by that fiasco, rarely wore the same haughty expression. She'd grown more subdued, ensuring no potential buyer, no matter how plain, was dismissed. Others who still had jobs did likewise. The tower's culture underwent a subtle, lasting transformation. She did not raise her voice. She did not hurl vengeance or demand kneeling apologies. She let them drown in their own scorn when the truth arrived. And in the end, that quiet, unwavering calm set everything right. If this story resonates, let its gentle courage remain close. If you choose to share, may it travel to those who've known the sting of prejudice. We'll keep this memory alive for you, a testament to how stillness defeats arrogance. If you depart from it now, carry her composure like a soft ember of hope, and let it guide you whenever you see someone judged for the clothes they wear or the silence they keep.